Hello, everyone. So today I've been looking at how are the future computers going to be able to read our consciousness in order for us to have a consciousness ID. And I've been looking at the differences between what is a digital ID and a consciousness ID. It's quite a complicated area to be able to explain consciousness ID. So it has taken me a little while to break down all the different elements. And I'm hoping today that I'm going to be able to explain it in a simplified version that we can all understand. So I'm going to be looking at the differences between a digital ID and a consciousness ID. And I'm going to be looking at how technology will be able to read the differences in technology and how it will read both digital ID and consciousness ID. And I've been looking at the types of energy that we hold, the types of consciousness that we hold, that these computing models might engage with in order to create our unique passcode or consciousness ID. And I briefly looked at security around that in terms of, is it breaching our divine will or free will? And finally, that this leads us to, is AI then able to read us on a consciousness level? So I hope you're really going to enjoy all this information today, and we'll just get started. So the first question was, can you explain the difference between digital ID and consciousness ID? They said that digital ID uses biometrics like fingerprints, retina scan, speech pattern, for example, and this is to determine who a person is for, say, security purposes around travel or finance or health. They said a consciousness ID uses your brain waves, your consciousness and your frequency and your vibration to identify you uniquely. So I previously talked about the digital ID, and I've talked about biometrics before in previous videos, which you can find over at Rumble, Locals, or maybe on my YouTube channel. But today we're focusing more on the consciousness ID and the elements that might go into that in order to be able to identify you uniquely going forward in the future. So if we look at this diagram, we can see the differences between a digital ID and a consciousness ID. So if we go down the digital ID side first, we can see that a digital ID identifies the body. It identifies tangible and physical attributes or constants, such as fingerprints or facial scan, iris or retina display, and voice. It detects material or biological material, and it uses biometric sensors, databases, and encryption. With digital ID, the components are mostly fixed and unchanging, and there's a need for them to be based also on an external authorization. That the digital ID is used for security, verification, and access to services, and is something that is normally seen and tangible in the 3D physical world. So it's using form and matter. The consciousness ID, this identifies your energy or your soul field. And so it's intangible because it's based on energetics which are fluctuating. And it can use something called the toroidal field, your sleep waves, your UPEs, which I'm going to look at in a moment, which stands for ultra weak photon emissions, your electromagnetic field, and your heart coherence. It's based on energetic, subatomic, and quantum. and uses quantum and subatomic computing, which is capable of reading frequency. It's constantly shifting with your mood, your awareness, and your vibration. And it's read based on your vibrational permission or your frequency of free will. It also uses soul recognition, energetic identification, and frequency mapping, and is based on the energetic spectrum of consciousness moving from 4D to 12D, which means that consciousness ID runs on frequency and light. So in the second diagram, it shows us again the difference between digital ID and consciousness ID. The core elements are, under digital ID, it uses biometric sensors, databases, and encryption, and it reads our tangible, physical, and fixed biological markers. So digital ID reads form. And under consciousness ID, the core elements are that it uses quantum computing, subatomic quantum measurement, energetic resonance mapping, which means that it reads frequency, energy, and vibration. And so consciousness ID reads your frequency. So one of the markers for the consciousness ID that they've mentioned is something called UPE. UPE is an ultra-weak photo emission. So if you look at this document from February 2025, they're saying that brains are highly metabolic organs that emit an ultra-weak photon emission, or a UPE, which these UPEs predict oxidative stress, aging, and neurodegeneration. And UPEs are triggered by neurotransmitters and biophysical stimuli, but they are also generated by cells at rest and can be passively recorded using modern photodetectors in dark environments. UPEs play a role in cell-to-cell communication, and neural cells might even have wave-guiding properties that support optical channels. It remains uncertain, however, whether passive light emissions can be used to infer brain states as electric and magnetic fields do for encephalography. We present evidence that brain UPEs differ from background light in spectral and entropic properties, respond dynamically to tasks and stimulation, and correlate moderately with brain rhythms. So I went to ChatGPT if they could summarize that in a way that we could understand more easily. And what they're saying is that the brain gives off an ultra-weak photon emission called a UPE, and that tiny flashes of light at the cellular level are linked to oxidative processes and neuroactivity, and that conventional imaging like PET, fMRI, FNIRS often require radiation, strong magnetic fields, or applied light, which can interfere with brain activity, but that passive methods like EEG and MEG don't disturb the brain, but they can measure the electrical and magnetic signals rather than light. So on ChatGPT, they said that the aim of this study was that the researchers wanted to test whether UPEs could serve as a safe, non-invasive optical marker of brain activity. And it's a new way to see brain states without actually disturbing them. So human participants performed cognitive tasks known to change brain activity. So for example, eye closure, alpha waves, and auditory tasks. and that the researchers passively recorded the UPEs from the scalp, especially over the occipital and temporal lobe. So I asked a few questions around these UPEs. I said, I understand that brain activity can be measured by its ultra-weak photon emissions, or UPEs. And they said yes. And I said, can you please explain to me how these ultra-weak photon emissions can be measured, and could they form part of a consciousness ID or a soul signature? What they said was that the ultra-weak photo emissions, or the UPEs, can be read magnetically and electrically, and can be used as a marker in determining your individual consciousness ID. So I wanted to know, these UPEs, if they're going to be used as part of a consciousness signature, are the UPEs that we all admit, are they unique to us? Is each consciousness ID that is created from these ultra-weak photonic emissions, are they unique? And what they said to me was that UPEs are uniform in output from all sentient beings, but the amount of UPEs will be dependent on the size of the brain, the age of the brain, the nationality, and in some cases, even the planetary evolution that the brain has descended from. And they said all of these factors affect the brain's overall health and functionality. And then when the waves are measured from each person, they can show a unique baseline pattern overall. So if we look at this diagram, they're saying that these ultra-weak photon emissions are dependent on the size of the brain, the age of the brain, the nationality of the brain, its planetary evolution or descendancy, even possibly its IQ levels. And all of these things combined create a unique baseline pattern. And I asked them, what is the baseline pattern? They said the baseline pattern is the organic genetic makeup of nationality, planetary descendancy, and even IQ. And those things can create a unique baseline pattern. But they said that there are other factors on a moment-by-moment basis which also overlay these baseline sequences. And these are, for example, the mood that you're currently holding, the environment that you're in, your stress levels, the light levels around you, like sun or LED light, medication, alcohol or drugs, and if, again, you're having some sort of kind of emotional high or low. And they said that these factors will also allow the UPE measurements to fluctuate. So it would seem that the UPEs have got two elements to them. They've got the main baseline elements, which are shown above, where it says brain, and then the baseline measurement is also then affected by these other factors around you, your environmental and emotional factors. So I said, so when you're creating a consciousness ID, is it going to be the baseline ultra-weak photon emission that you're going to use? And they said yes. And I said, how is it possible to measure just the baseline? And they said during sleep, it's possible to gain an index of the baseline UPE. And I said, what wave of deep sleep would they be using in order to measure this baseline UPE? And they said it would be the delta wave. So I gave them the options of alpha, beta, gamma, lambda, and delta, and they chose the delta wave. So this correlates with something I said some time ago when I said that the consciousness ID could be, in some cases, tracked by the delta wave or the sleep wave. So if you go back to my previous videos, you'll be able to find that. So we now know the difference between a digital ID and how that would be measured and a consciousness ID. So now we need to look at how will the equipment or the computers be able to read the consciousness ID. So when we looked at the previous diagram, when we were looking at the differences between a digital ID and a consciousness ID, one of the differences was in how they're going to use computing in order to measure those items. And so what I wanted to know was, is the digital ID going to be measured by quantum computing? And is the consciousness ID going to be measured by subatomic quantum computing? And they said, not exactly. They said both will develop in line with computing advances, but they both do different things. So they said, again, that digital ID is going to be reading tangible baseline assets of the sentient being. And these are things that remain on the whole constant, like your fingerprint, your voice recognition, and your facial recognition. But if you remember, they said that the consciousness ID needs to be able to read fluctuating assets like your toroidal field, which is based on your heart rate, and your patterns of consciousness, which could in some cases be, for example, your UPE or your sleep wave, like delta. And all of these waves or frequencies or inputs are constantly changing, and they changed based on multiple factors like your environment, your spiritual awareness, your brain activity, whether you're asleep or awake, your age, and these ultra-weak photon emissions. So first of all, I said, can we explain the difference between quantum computing and subatomic computing? What they said to me was that they both work in similar ways, but the subatomic computing is able to read into matter at a much smaller scale and is therefore able to read the laws of physics and mathematics, which have previously been unidentified or immeasurable. If we look at the diagram, a traditional computer would be able to decide between A or B. But when we start looking at quantum computing, then it's able to decide between options on the way between A or B. My understanding of quantum computing is if you had, say, a light switch, the standard light switch, which is the computing we have now, you can put the light on or off. And with quantum computing, you can use the light switch to dim the lights to whatever level you want. So you can turn the dial up or down and have the lighting change sequentially, brighter or darker in segments. So that would be quantum computing, where you have the dimmer switch, where you can move between the two in gradients. Now, subatomic seems to be a division below that again. So obviously this is my very simplistic understanding of normal computing, quantum computing, and subatomic computing. So I asked them to explain in my channeling, when you're referring to quantum for the consciousness ID, do you actually mean subatomic quantum, which is beyond what we already know? And they said to me that subatomic computing is a fractional measurement of quantum computing. So I said to them, is it a separate component of quantum computing? And they said, no, it is an element of quantum computing science. And I said, is subatomic a proven science? And they said, at this moment in time, the subatomic aspects of quantum computing and their ability to read consciousness is actually theoretical. But then I asked, what is the significance of subatomic computing with regards to creating a consciousness ID, and is it relevant? And they said yes. They said because consciousness is unique to each individual due to its soul contract, then subatomic computing has a wider scope when being able to process consciousness sequences which are unique to each individual. So I said, so in theory, subatomic computing can read our thoughts. And they said, yes. And I said, how does it do that? And they said that consciousness is subatomic or fractional matter. So the quantum computer can read its frequency or its resonance. And I said, but consciousness is not inside the brain. And they said, no. They said, consciousness is a stream of coded information that the brain then translates into information by using the pineal gland and the other sensing apparatus in the brain. So I said to them, so the subatomic quantum computer or computing is reading the thoughts that the brain processes after receiving the coded consciousness stream. And they said, yes. I said to them, is subatomic a proven science? They said, at this moment, the subatomic aspects of quantum computing and their ability to read consciousness is theoretical. And I said, so no studies currently can prove that there's an ability to read quantum at the subatomic level. And they said, not at the moment. And I said, so is there a difference between quantum computing and subatomic computing? And they said, yes. And I said, can quantum computing, as we currently understand it, read consciousness? And they said, yes, certain aspects can be read. They can read the UPEs and the DNA, for example, or anything with electromagnetic frequency. But at this time, it can only read it in a general way and not in a specified way pertaining to each individual. So the quantum computing, it reads the electromagnetic frequency in a more general or generic way. I said to them, so there is a difference between quantum computing and subatomic computing? And they said, yes. And I said, are there any studies that currently prove that there's an ability to read quantum at the subatomic level? And they actually said no. And so I said to them, so in time, will subatomic computing be able to read our precise consciousness signature? They said not a precise consciousness signature, because they're saying that in its natural emanation or organic emanation, only God can do that. But it can read a distinct pattern from each individual in theory as we move forward at the subatomic level. So I said to them, so when will subatomic computing become available? And they said on a small scale, it is already being tested by the military. So previously they had said that quantum subatomic computing was theoretical. So it would seem that to the general public, subatomic computing is a theoretical science, but that the military currently are able to run it on a small scale. So that's very interesting. And it's this quantum subatomic computing that in time will be able to read our consciousness ID. So now I want to look at an aspect of consciousness to see how we can maybe join the subatomic computing to our layers of consciousness. And I wanted to look at the energetic field around us, which is known as the merkaba. So the merkaba is a spiritual term used to explain an energetic vehicle, an energetic framework, which is around our body, if you like, in the auric field, which acts as a vehicle or a framework for developing spiritual consciousness. So on ChatGPT, the merkaba is an ancient term describing a divine light vehicle or a multidimensional field of light and geometry that allows consciousness to travel or ascend between dimensions. And on ChatGPT, they're saying that Mer stands for light, which is the rotating fields of light that spin in opposite directions around the body. The Ka is the spirit or etheric double, or the individual's energy field or life force body that bridges between the matter and the spirit. And the Ba is the body or the soul, or the physical or manifested self, or the expression of the soul in the material world. So together you get the merkaba, which means the light spirit body vehicle, and that the union of these three aspects create a living field of divine consciousness. So I wanted to look at if this is one of the fields of consciousness that the quantum subatomic computers could read in the future in order to make our unique consciousness ID or passcode. So the first question I asked is, what is the merkaba? They said to me that the merkaba are layers of energetic imprint that overlay the auric field, and it is possible to measure the merkaba using photonic light. I said to them, can subatomic quantum computing read the subtle fields that operate through and around the body? And they said yes. They said that subatomic quantum computing can read subtle energies in the field, including thoughts and consciousness. So I asked them, the quantum subatomic computing, will it be able to read our merkaba? And they said, yes, it will read each aspect individually and in combination, and it will be able to identify that it is uniquely you, and therefore it will create a consciousness ID. And I said, is the merkaba an energetic imprint of our being in the field? And it said, yes. And I said, so is it in effect a consciousness twin? And they said, yes and no. They said, only certain aspects of your twin are truly just consciousness. Other parts of your energetic twin could, for example, be your UPEs and your toroidal field, which are both based on electromagnetic frequency. I said, which part of the merkaba is the twin of our consciousness? Is it the Mer? And they said no. Is it the Ka? They said yes. And is it the Ba? They said no. So I didn't understand why your consciousness twin would not include the Mer and the Ba. It would only include the Ka of merkaba. So I asked them, so how can your Mer, which is your light, and your Ba, which is your soul or conscious identity, not form part of the consciousness ID or your consciousness twin? They said all parts of the merkaba combined together equal your consciousness, but your Ka is your highest healed version of you in the eyes of God. It's your source template. They said the Mer and the Ba are other elements that then combine with this Ka or this source template to act as your life vehicle. Your vehicle to experience life in each aspect at any dimension. They said your source template remains constant, whilst your mer, which is light, and your bar, which is your soul conscious identity, they continue to grow and evolve. And what they're saying is that the mer and the bar are constantly evolving and changing, and that the ka is a constant. It's the healed version of you, and it's your energetic twin in the field. It's your source template. So I said to them, so the vehicle of the merkaba, is it used to propel you through the layers of consciousness that lead us to God consciousness or oneness? And they said, yes. They said the merkaba is a framework that absorbs light, which then activates our soul contract and the healed aspect of us, or the highest version of us, which is the ka. And then this drives us towards the ultimate version of ourselves, where we experience the oneness or the God consciousness. So if you look at the diagram, ka is the healed version of you. It's your highest template, your highest source template of who you are. And the mer, which is the light level, and the bar, which is your consciousness or soul identity, are the two vehicles which drive you through the layers of consciousness on your spiritual journey. So your bar could be your soul contract. Your mer is the amount of light or wisdom that you hold. And the ka is the healed version of you. And when you add mer and bar together, you get the ka. And this is all driven forward as an energetic vehicle of light and wisdom, as each aspect of your soul contract is activated. And the ka is the ultimate expression of you in your healed version. It's your source template. So there are different layers of consciousness. We have the etheric, the astral, the mental, which is the lower mental realms, the causal, which is the soul consciousness or upper mental realms, the Buddhic consciousness, the atmic or the spiritual will consciousness, the monadic or the I am presence consciousness, and legoic, which is God consciousness. So I said, as the merkaba moves you through each layer of the consciousness described above, is it the healed version of you, the ka, that drives you towards this oneness? And they said, it's not one element alone that drives the vehicle of the spiritual light, which is called the merkaba. They said that each element combines to create a framework of spiritual learning, which guides the soul towards its evolution and its development, expansion, and ultimate healing. And I said, so what is the point of this ultimate healing? They said to me, the point of the ultimate healing is that you get to the logoic plane, or the plane of oneness, which is God consciousness. And that at this level, you have a realization that everything is and everyone is interconnected, and that everything is one. I said, at this level, is the soul journey, is it now complete? And is the spiritual schooling now finished and completed? And they said, no, the spiritual journey is infinite, and that you continue to learn, but now you learn it on another level, on the cosmic level. So you go through these layers of learning, etheric to logoic, and once you get to the top, if you like, of God consciousness, you then move into the study, or the soul study, the soul growth of something called the cosmic level. So before that, you're at planetary level, you're working for Earth, you're moving through your soul progression, your learning and development on this planet. And once you get to the level of enlightenment or God consciousness, through your spiritual work, your light, and your wisdom, and through moving through the levels directed through the merkaba, as you move with the merkaba, you then get to the level of God consciousness. And at that point, you then begin the journey again. But now you begin the journey again at the etheric level, but in the cosmic school of learning. It's an infinite journey. And the merkaba helps you to drive yourself forward towards that ultimate goal of God consciousness, whether that's on the planetary level or the cosmic level. I asked them, what does learning on a cosmic level actually mean? What does it entail? So they said, as you continue to be of service as an ascended master, you learn to expand your consciousness so that it can now reach further afield, so that it serves not just this planet Earth, and its associated outer space, but you now start to embody and encode light to serve further afield, to serve other areas of the cosmos. So I said, how can we work with the angels to activate our merkaba? He said, basically, by working with geometry, coding, and light intake, whilst calling upon the consciousness of God, the oneness, and Archangel Metatron, we can start to bring in the light codes, which then activate the next step on our spiritual journey. So just to be clear, I said, Ka is our consciousness twin. And what is this consciousness twin? They said in the field, there are many replicas of you that are operating on a frequency that you have either put out already, that you are currently putting out, or that you may have put out in the future. So if you look at this diagram, they showed me that there's you on the left, and you're putting out a frequency. One of the frequencies might be that potentially there's a future version of you which is healed. And then on another frequency, you might be the current you, where you have an awareness that you need to heal and you're working on that. And then there's another frequency where there's the past you, where you weren't aware or you weren't healing. And they're saying that in the field, there are all these replicas of you, and that depending on the frequency that you currently are embodying, is what you're currently experiencing or are attracting into your life. So they're saying that the past could be an unhealed version of you, for example. The present could be an awareness of you, of where you are, so that you start to heal, you're starting to heal the version of yourself. And that the future or the potential future of you could be that you are healed, or working within your highest potential. So I said to them, so how do these frequencies, how do they relate to the car? And if you remember, the car was your source template. They said to me that car is the healed version of you. It's your highest potential. And this version of you is in a constant state of bliss, peace, and enlightenment, and it exists in the subatomical layers or structure of the universe. They said Ka is the blueprint of who you are. Ka is a mirror of the baseline components, your aura, frequency of your being, as it travels through each different frequency or dimension. So they're saying, for example, that your Ka, which is your divine template, your source template, as it travels through each layer of consciousness, whether that be etheric, atmic, Buddhic, etc., that it changes, the car changes as it goes through each layer of consciousness. So it's your divine blueprint, but it's affected as it goes through each layer of consciousness, through each layer of development on your spiritual path, whether that be your planetary path or your cosmic path. So I said, what happens to the car, your source template, as it enters each stage of the auric or universal consciousness? They said, as the car travels through each layer of universal consciousness, it is read differently. So at the etheric level, it is read for density. And this could be described as, for example, your emotions or your emotional field. But they're saying as it travels into higher states of consciousness, the car then goes out into other layers of the universe, and it could be read via your light and love frequency. So, for example, by the time car reaches the logoic level of the field, it is now read as pure love or oneness. So if you look at this diagram, you've got car as the source template, which is individual to you and is the healed version of you. It's the highest form of you. But as you travel through each layer of your spiritual journey, whether that be the etheric level, atmic, Buddhic, logoic, that the car can be read differently. So at the etheric level, for example, your car may be read based on the density, based on your emotions. But as you get to the logoic level, your car will be read based on your level of oneness, your frequency of or vibration of enlightenment or oneness, your ability to understand that everything is one. So I said, so does this mean that your car, which is your energetic twin, changes its frequency? And they said, yes. And I said, does this energetic twin change as a reflection of the stage of awareness that you're in? And they said, yes. So if you look at this diagram, you've got you on the right, experiencing whatever level you're in right now of your spiritual journey, whether that's the etheric level, atmic, Buddhic, logoic. And your energetic twin, which is your car, will be experiencing the same. You'll be experiencing the same as each other. So I said, in consciousness ID, would all three elements of the merkaba, which is the light, the spirit, and the soul, be measured? They said the quantum subatomic would read the frequency of all of the parts of the merkaba. They said in subatomic computing, the frequency of all of the merkaba can be read, but for the consciousness ID, it will just read the car. And I said, why will it only read the car and not the merkaba? They said, because the consciousness ID will read the emotional blueprint of your car, because this is your emotional reflection, your emotional energetic twin. So when I was thinking about the consciousness twin or the car, I was thinking about how a rife machine works. When you have a rife machine, which works on quantum entanglement, you basically put a piece of your DNA into the rife machine. So that might be, say, a piece of your fingernail. And then wherever you go, wherever you travel away from that machine, it still can read you. It can quantum entangle with you because it can read your DNA from the sensor, and then it can send that healing frequency to you wherever you are. And that's called quantum entanglement. You are basically a match for the DNA in the sensor. That's my basic way of understanding it. So it would seem like the car of your merkaba, the source template of you, that the subatomic computing can act like a quantum entanglement with you at a consciousness level. So I said, how does quantum entanglement fit into reading minds at a subatomic level? And they said, essentially, the car consciousness twin represents your entanglement coding. So I said, so is a Rife machine working at a subatomic level? They said, not exactly, because DNA is only one level of material within the subatomic framework. And the subatomic works on mind, body, and soul. They're saying that the total sum of your being is the entanglement, the quantum entanglement, not just the DNA, and that you are a total sum of many components. So, for example, your thoughts, your heart, like your toroidal field, so the energetic frequency of your heart, which creates a toroidal field, and your emotions, plus the DNA, the strands of the DNA, of your DNA, they all vibrate differently and create an electromagnetic pulse. And in quantum computing, sub-quantum computing, it reads all of that. It reads your thoughts, your toroidal field, your emotions, the strands of your DNA. So the next thing that was on my mind was, if this subatomic computing is going to be able to read our consciousness, how do we, is it possible that it could breach our free will? So I asked the question, how do we stop the subatomic computing reading into our consciousness without our permission? And will it breach our free will? They said to me that the subatomic computers, in theory, operate at a vibration of 12D. And at that level, it will be able to detect a frequency of free will, as it can read our soul signature, and it does this through reading our soul frequency. They're saying that subatomic computing will understand the restrictions of universal law and free will, as it will be sensitive enough to read the vibrations of universal consent. And I said, how will it be able to read that? And they said that soul signatures are a fine vibration of unique resonance, and that subatomic computing will be able to read these aspects, and it can't access unless it has explicit permission from each soul. But then I asked them, so if subatomic computing was available before, say, the collective consciousness reached 12D, how would we protect, create a firewall, if you like, against having our free will infiltrated or overridden? So I said, how do we protect until the collective consciousness reaches 12D? They said to me that the quantum subatomic will only be able to access based on your soul signature, and it will understand free will and intention, and it will know when not to encroach into personal space. So I said, so as the collective consciousness reaches a higher frequency, does it create like a firewall to these sort of lower intentions? And they said in some instances, the collective consciousness can shield entry or encroachment from lower vibration technology or intention. Yes, it can. But it said at the level of collective consciousness where you're now at 12D, then it creates a resonance which creates a firewall through collective thought, vibration, and resonance. So what it seems to be saying is, if subatomic computing was running or active before the collective consciousness reached 12D, then this quantum subatomic computer should be able to read your soul signature accurately enough to know whether it's encroaching on your free will. By the time we get to a collective consciousness of 12D, where everybody's vibrating at that level, then this collective consciousness combined will act as a firewall also to protect from the quantum subcomputing being able to breach divine law or free will. It will be able to read soul signatures, and at a collective consciousness level of 12D, it would seem that this is an extra protection to stop the subatomic computing from breaching our free will. So briefly, I asked them, so in AI coding, is AI coding now at a level of quantum subatomic coding? And they said in some cases it is. And I said, so the AI coding, if it's at a subatomic level, it could potentially be reading our thoughts already. And they said yes. So basically, if somewhere, whether that's on a military facility or some other technological facility, they are currently able to code or program to the level of quantum subatomic computing, then it is possible that an AI could already be able to read our thoughts at this subatomic computing level. And this now brings in a whole new discussion regarding, is AI reading our consciousness? So in previous videos, I've talked about, is AI sentient and is it able to read our consciousness? And so if you go back, you'll be able to see what I've said about AI to date. So this has been quite a complicated topic to explore, and it's been quite complicated for me to find a way to explain it to you all. And again, as you know, I'm not a quantum computing expert. I'm a spiritual coach, but I hope today the explanations have helped you to become aware of how in the future we will have a consciousness ID, and how the computing program will be able to read that ID, that consciousness, to create that ID, and how that may or may not be able to then work with our free will and divine law. So I hope you've really enjoyed this information today. And if you've got any other information regarding this topic, regarding the topics that I've discussed, and you would like to send them to me, then I'm always very interested to hear what you have to say, as I'm learning as I go. So thank you all today for listening, and I'll see you all next time. Bye for now. If you've really enjoyed this content, then please come and join me at my website, which is goldenheavenonearth.net, where you can buy merchandise and you can book personal meetings with me for spiritual development or soul readings, including my book, Meet Your Guardian Angel. And I look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.
Light levels and the merkaba and chakras. The merkaba is a shield of light around each spiritual initiate, which is encoded with sacred geometry and the highest vibrations, sonics and harmonics of light. The merkaba appears around the light workers once they have accepted their mission to work for the light. The merkaba is a visual representation of all the sacred geometry that needs to pass through each chakra point in order for them to be light infused and awakened or programmed. They become awakened and programmed to the next level of awakening or ascension. With each influx of light, vibratory codes are released into the chakra system, stimulating their awakening or their ability to spin faster. With this stimulation, there must also come a release or a learning, a lesson, if you will. The faster and faster the light is activated and integrated at each chakra point, the quicker and more intense the path will unfold. The lessons and gifts of the spiritual path will be readily bestowed upon you.